and an old, ragged man carrying a worn sack stepped into the bank and declared, "This bank is mine." The crowd chuckled, and security moved forward to escort him out. But when he opened the sack, the room fell silent in shock. The afternoon sun cast long shadows over the quiet streets of Rockview, a small town where little ever seemed to happen, until that day. The doors of Chase Bank swung open with a creak, and an old man entered. His face was partly obscured beneath the brim of a weathered cap, his frail frame hunched under the weight of a coarse cloth sack slung over one shoulder. The fabric bore, the stains of time and wear. The few customers in the lobby barely glanced his way, while the bank employees behind their polished counters exchanged knowing smiles. He looked like someone who might wander in to ask for spare change rather than conduct business. But when he reached the center of the room, he lifted his head, revealing eyes filled with something unreadable. Hope, determination, or perhaps something more. "I own this bank," he stated in a firm but calm voice, despite his frail appearance. For a moment, silence lingered. Then a soft chuckle escaped from a teller, followed by another, until even the branch manager, a man in a crisp gray suit, smirked with amusement. Their laughter, however, would be short-lived. Very soon they would realize this was no joke. As the laughter rippled through the room, a young teller leaned toward her colleague, whispering while struggling to stifle a grin. The security guard, a tall, broad-shouldered man named Stephen, folded his arms and stepped forward. "Sir," he said in a steady, authoritative tone, "I think you're mistaken. Maybe you should take a seat while we call someone to assist you." The old man didn't budge. Instead, he adjusted the sack on his shoulder and let it drop to the marble floor with a heavy thud. The sound echoed through the room, abruptly silencing the laughter. "I am not mistaken," he said, his voice unwavering. "This bank belongs to me." The branch manager, Timothy Tim Temp, sighed, stepping forward with a patient smile, the kind reserved for confused customers. "Sir, with all due respect, I don't believe that's possible. Do you have an account here?" The old man tilted, his head slightly, his lined face unreadable. "Account? Son, I built this bank." A faint, uneasy chuckle escaped from the crowd. Stephen inched closer, his hand hovering near his belt. "All right, sir," he said cautiously. "Why don't you tell us what's in the sack?" A slow, deliberate smile spread across the old man's face, not a grin of amusement, but one that held memories and something deeper. He bent down, grasped the sack's rough burlap, and pulled it open. The laughter vanished. A stunned hush fell over the bank. Instead of worthless junk or a handful of old coins, bundles of aged banknotes tumbled onto the floor, bills bound in paper bands stamped with Chase Bank's original logo, a design retired over 50 years ago. A dusty leather-bound ledger followed, its cracked cover and yellowed pages hinting at its age. Tim's eyes widened as he stepped closer, his confident expression faltering. What is this?" he murmured. The old man nodded knowingly. "Proof," he said simply. "Proof that I built this bank before your father was even born." Stephen hesitated, his trained eye recognizing the authenticity of the bills. Tim swallowed hard, his mind racing. "That's impossible," he stammered. "Even if this money is old, it doesn't prove anything." The old man interrupted. "Check the ledger. My name is in there." Tim hesitated before carefully lifting the fragile book. He flipped through the brittle pages until his fingers stilled. His gaze lifted to the old man, shock evident in his expression. "C.K. Kirby," he whispered. A gasp escaped from a woman near the counter. A man near the door muttered under his breath. The name wasn't unfamiliar. It belonged to the bank's original founder, but that was impossible. "C.K. Kirby has been gone for decades," Tim said, shaking his head. "If he were alive today, he'd be over 100 years old." The old man's eyes glinted. "And yet, here I am." A heavy silence gripped the bank. No one laughed now. The weight of the moment settled over the room like an impending storm. The only sound was the quiet rustling of ledger pages as Tim continued flipping through records, his face growing paler with each passing second. This ledger is over 60 years old, he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. And the handwriting, it matches the signatures in our original documents, he exhaled shakily. This ledger is real. The old man straightened. Older than that, son, he said, his voice steady. I founded this bank in 1948 with my own 2 hands. I ran it until the day they stole it from me. Tim's head snapped up. Stole it? Kirby nodded, gripping the sack tightly. They erased me. My business partner, John Williams. We built this bank together. I trusted him, but greed does strange things to a man. One day, he had the documents changed, convinced the board I was unfit to run it, and just like that, I was erased. My name was forgotten, my legacy stolen. A murmur spread through the small crowd. But that was decades ago, someone whispered. Kirby nodded. I fought for years to reclaim what was mine, but doors kept shutting in my face. No one wanted to listen. Eventually I disappeared, just like they wanted. Tim swallowed hard. And now you're back? Kirby met his gaze. Yes, he said, his fingers tightening around the sack. I'm back. Around the sack again, the old man stood firm. I'm here to take back what's mine. A chill ran through the room. Stephen shifted his stance, uneasy. All right, sir. I'm going to have to ask you. Kirby reached into the sack again. Gasps filled the air. A woman near the entrance took a step back. Stephen's hand flew to his holster. But when Kirby pulled his hand out, it wasn't a weapon. He held a stack of papers, yellowed, stamped, and signed legal documents. He stepped forward hesitantly, taking the papers from the old man's outstretched hand. His eyes scanned the text, his face tightening with every line he read. Then he stopped. His hands trembled slightly. Oh my God, he whispered. What is it? Stephen asked, still tense. What is it? T lifted his eyes to meet Kirby's. These documents, he swallowed. They show that you never sold the bank. Kirby gave a small, satisfied nod. That's right. Temp shook his head in disbelief. If these are real, then... He turned to the framed certificates behind him, bearing the name Matt and Sons, the family that had controlled the bank for generations. Then this bank was stolen. From you. The crowd murmured louder now. Kirby took a deep breath. I spent my whole life fighting to prove it, and now, here I am. T straightened up, his mind racing. If these papers were real, and they certainly looked real, then C.K. Kirby had a legal right to the very building they stood in. That meant the true owner of Chase Bank was standing right in front of them. The people who had laughed at him just moments ago now stared in stunned silence. The weight of the moment settled over the bank like a dark storm. Soft whispers filled the air, quiet voices mixing with worry and uncertainty. T's hands shook as he turned the old pages, his heart pounding with every signature, every official stamp that proved the truth. The old man stood very still, his presence now commanding. He had entered the bank as a joke, a lost man from the past, mistaken for a confused wanderer. But now, he was something else entirely. A force. The ghost. Of a long-hidden truth standing amidst the shiny floors, high ceilings, and grand chandeliers. Every part of the building had been built on stolen dreams, a monument to lies, and the man who had been cast aside, forgotten, had returned. Temp sighed, his thoughts spinning. This was more than just an embarrassing moment. More than an old man with an unbelievable tale. This was a reckoning. If the papers were real, and they surely looked real, then the entire history of Chase Bank was a lie. The workers who had once been amused now stood rigid, their eyes shifting between Temp and the old man. The customers who had once been indifferent now clutched their belongings, as if caught in something much larger than themselves. The security guard shifted uncomfortably, his fingers still near his belt, unsure whether this moment called for strength or caution. Outside, the world went on. Cars drove by, people walked past, unaware of the truth unfolding within the bank. But inside, time felt impossibly slow. The old man bent down and lifted a bundle of the old banknotes from his sack. He ran his fingers over the worn paper as if touching the past, a past where he had once possessed wealth, power, and trust, only to have it all stolen. The heavy years sat on his shoulders, yet his hands remained steady, and felt his throat tighten. He had spent his whole career believing in the bank's history, its rules, its old traditions, and now that strong foundation was crumbling beneath him. A choice lay ahead. Would they speak the truth, fix the past and make things right, or would they bury it once again? The room stayed silent. Somewhere far away, a clock chimed the hour, and the old man waited. The atmosphere in the bank had shifted completely. The laughter had faded into a solemn silence, a quiet acknowledgement that something far greater than any of them had just been uncovered. The weight of history settled over the marble room, a stark reminder of a long-buried injustice. CK. Kirby stood firm, his expression calm but his presence undeniable. He had waited a lifetime for this moment, not just to be heard, but to be recognized. His gaze swept the room, taking in the symbols of wealth, the gleaming brass plaques, the heavy wooden desks, all standing on ground that had once belonged to him. To swallowed hard, knowing what needed to be done. The papers in his hands felt heavier, as if carrying the entire history of the bank. Slowly, he turned toward the back office. The board needed to see this. The lawyers would have to be involved. But as he reached the door, he hesitated. He already knew how this would play out. The bank's owners, the Matt family, would deny everything. They would claim the documents were forged, drag the case through endless legal battles, hoping that time would once again bury the truth. And Kirby? He might not have years left to fight. A quiet murmur spread among the employees. A few exchanged uncertain glances. Then a young teller stepped forward. She bent down, carefully picked up one of the faded banknotes from the pile at Kirby's feet, and examined it for a long moment. Then, with great care, she placed it on the counter, as if setting down something precious. That simple act shattered the heavy silence. One by one, the employees followed suit, each stepping forward to place a piece of Kirby's past, the proof of his claim, his legacy, onto the counter. Stephen, the security guard, shifted his weight, but did not intervene. His hand, once near his belt, now rested at his side. He met Kirby's eyes and gave a small nod of respect. Kirby stood motionless, saying nothing. He had no more battles to fight. He had come armed only with the truth and the weight of his years. And now, for the first time in decades, he was truly being seen. Temp finally spoke, his voice quiet. "This isn't over," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. No, it wasn't over, but it had begun. Kirby exhaled slowly, then turned toward the door. His steps were steady, confident. He did not look back. He didn't need to. For the first time in a long, long time, he had won. As the sun dipped below the horizon in Rockview, a new chapter was beginning for Chase Bank, one built on truth, justice, and the courage to reclaim what was once lost. Thank you for watching. If this story resonated with you, sparked your curiosity, or challenged your perspective on history, join our community. Hit like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters. Together, we can uncover more hidden stories waiting to be told.